We're going to look at how the RG505 directly compares to the AYN Odin Pro for GameCube emulation. As I always say with these direct comparisons, these are like for like. Both the same emulator, same settings, everything's set exactly the same apart from them being on different systems. Starting with Mario Kart, we can see that the AYN Odin Pro handles this no problem with a solid 60 frames per second throughout. But the RG505 does a fantastic job at catching up to 60 frames per second often throughout the game. When I first got my hands on the RG505, I did not expect to be able to make a comparison like this. I did not expect for it to be able to play any GameCube games anywhere near the same level of an AYN Odin Pro. And considering the price difference between these two devices, it's really interesting. Next up we have NBA Street 2, and this is a bit of a different story. Once again, the AYN Odin Pro handles this flawlessly at 60 frames per second, giving you a brilliant game. The RG505 does struggle a little bit with this one. I'd say on average around about 30 frames per second, jumping up to 50 every so often. The occasional 60, but for the most part I'd say it's averaging around 40. The difference between these two is the consistency of the Odin Pro in this test. But as I always say, 40 frames per second makes a game very playable, and you really have to ask the question of if the extra money of an Odin Pro is really worth it now. Next up we have Need for Speed Underground, and once again the Odin Pro does run this faster, but just a little bit faster, adding maybe about 10 frames per second over the RG505, not a significant amount, and the game itself isn't that playable on the Odin Pro anyway. So if this was the type of game you were looking at playing on one of these devices, there isn't really a significant improvement in the Odin Pro in this example. Next up is Super Mario Sunshine, and this is where things get really interesting. For the most part, the RG505 and the Odin Pro handle this like for like, both of them averaging around about 30 frames per second with a few drops down to the 20. And it's reasons why I started doing these comparisons with the Odin Pro, because when playing the RG505 it just felt a little bit more impressive than I thought it was going to. It felt a lot closer to the Odin Pro than I expected. And when I started doing the test, I was really surprised to see that any games could get this close and even match the system. And the same can be said for Extreme G3 as well, a very fast-paced, intense game. It plays brilliantly on the RG505. And it's almost toe-to-toe with the Odin Pro. As you would expect, there is more power in the Odin Pro and there are extra frames per second to be found. But the question really has to be asked if the AYN Odin Pro is still as relevant as it once was now that these amazing budget-friendly handhelds can handle PlayStation 2 and GameCube emulation the way they can. Carrying on the example is Simpsons Hit and Run. And once again, the RG505 can comfortably hit 60 frames per second with this at times, although it does drop down to around about the 40. Once again, the Odin Pro stays a bit more consistent with this one. But if that kind of difference is worth the extra money, that's for you to decide. But we also need to check out the PlayStation 2 emulation, and things get really interesting there.